If this is true, it means your cell phone is just as bad as asbestos and smoking. So that's the first line of research that makes people realize, well, if that's true, of course, it means that using a cell phone for your entire life could lead to an increase in brain tumors.
Welcome, everyone, to the show. And I have a very special guest with me today. He is known as the EMF Guy. We're going to be talking about EMFs today, as you can guess. It is Nick Pineault, and I'm so happy and glad that he was able to join us for today's podcast. He is a #1 best-selling author of The Non-Tinfoil Guide to EMFs, and he is a leading voice on the topic of electromagnetic pollution and how it affects our health. Now, Nick has interviewed some really high-profile people and some of the best minds on health and technology, and offers even courses and educational materials to raise awareness all about this topic of EMF. So, Nick, welcome on into the show. Thank you for joining me today.
Thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
It's so great to have you, and I'm so looking forward to this conversation today. Of course, you know that I talk about EMFs, so you actually found me, and I've been following you for a number of years now. Tell us, what exactly are EMFs?
Sure. EMF stands for electromagnetic fields or electromagnetic frequencies. And in nature, we are always exposed to EMFs. And that's one of the points that many people make. Well, aren't we always exposed? Yes, for sure. There's visible light, there's invisible frequencies as well in the UV and infrared spectrum. And we need these natural frequencies to thrive. There's even, the Schumann resonance that is the natural earth magnetism that we are exposed to. And we know that we also need this resonance to thrive. However, in the last several decades, we've introduced new EMFs. We can call them human-made EMFs. And this is really the type of EMFs that can be considered a new type of electropollution. And that's really how I prefer to call it these days.
Yes, so some examples of that, just so that people know that we're all on the same page. So,
like cell phones,
cell phone towers,
Bluetooth,
right?
A lot of technology that people are in love with these days, including the cell phone towers that need to communicate with one another. Now there's also thousands, if not now going to hundreds of thousands of satellites that are going to be launched as well. So this entire infrastructure emits EMFs, and there's an increasing amount of scientific concern over what is the potential effect that these EMFs have on humans, but also on anything biological that lives on the planet.
I see. And let's talk about some of those major negative effects when we talk about our health. We could talk maybe some of the symptoms as well, but when we talk about organ systems, can you sort of enlighten us a little bit as to what are some of the major concerns that you're seeing and what research is coming out now in terms of the negative effects of these EMFs on our health?
Sure. The most popular line of the research and where there's been the most research is with cancer and cell phones. That's something that's been, in I think a controversy since the 1980s, since the advent of the first Nokia phones. So literally we have 40 years of debate on this. But if you believe the IARC, which is a branch of the WHO, the International Agency for Research on Cancer, in 2011 they classified radio frequency radiation. That's exactly the type of EMFs emitted by your phone. They classified this agent, considered, an environmental pollutant, if you will, as a class 2B carcinogen. That's the lowest classification, and they were missing the animal data. Not enough studies were conclusive in mice and, for example, in rats. But we have now these studies. So scientists have reviewed the data in 2018, and top epidemiologists said, looking at the data now with these additional studies, including the National Toxicology Program study, it should be reclassified as a class 1 carcinogen. If this is true, it means your cell phone is just as bad as asbestos and smoking. So that's the first line of research that makes people realize, well, if that's true, of course, it means that using a cell phone for your entire life could lead to an increase in brain tumors. And a point that was made this afternoon on a separate interview is important. It's not like we're seeing millions of people die tomorrow morning from their phone. That's not the point. But
Right,
the
right.
problem is that we have billions of cell phone users. Almost every single human being is using a phone nowadays, and in 10 and 20 years it will be essentially every human being. And if we increase brain tumor risks by a mere percent, or even a fraction of 1%, then there's a lot of people that could be harmed. So the more technology is used in the entire population, the entire world, the more we need the research to be of extreme quality. But this is not what's happening. What is seen in the data and in this scientific world of EMFs is that the more findings that are found that there are health effects from these EMFs, and the less funding they get, because of course it goes against immense corporate interest, and also I think a human interest where we love technology, but at the same time we don't want to hear too much about the potential risks, and that's just a human thing. And
Yeah.
I understand that, but at the same time we have no choice but to actually face these dangers and recognize that there are downsides to this technology.
Right. So an analogy would be, the teenager who doesn't want to hear mom and dad saying that, oh, smoking or drinking or vaping is bad for your health. You just kind of go, la, 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 I don't want to hear, right? As a young person.
For sure.
But we're not invincible as humans. And our physiology, as we know, is often going to give us signs and symptoms that maybe, too much of that cell phone. And it's all about proximity. From what I've seen in the data, it's about proximity, right? How
For
close
sure.
you're holding technology to your body. The earbuds in the ears, those air things, and Bluetooth, and it has a lot to do with proximity. So maybe you can give us a few little hacks. I know that I'm sure in your home you've got some hacks in terms of protecting yourself from these EMFs. But what can we do with our tech and our cell phones and things? Just give us some practical little tips that our users and our followers and our viewers can really, some takeaway points that can really help them in their day-to-day lives.
For sure, and some of these are extremely easy to apply to your life. They just take a little bit more effort, or at first you have to remember to do them. One
Right, right.
example is when you talk on the phone, you can use speakerphone, and if you don't want to annoy the entire subway train on your commute to work, you can always use wired headphones. And something that most people don't like hearing is that if you replace a phone that emits radio frequency radiation with a Bluetooth earbud that is inside your ear that emits the same type of radiation, you're probably just replacing one bad thing with another. So it's not a good alternative. And I'm not against using Bluetooth from time to time, but what I see in people who purchase these AirPods or equivalent from any other brand is that they wear them, as a fashion accessory
Ah,
almost 12 to 20 hours per day, even falling asleep with them, or even falling asleep with the phone under the pillow. So at
yeah.
what you want to do is just create distance between your body and the phone as much as you can. And we're not talking about going to extremes where if you have one phone call you're in danger, and it's not like that, because all these exposures are cumulative over a lifetime. So we're really
Right.
talking about habits here. It's like saying, are you in danger if you eat junk food once? No, we
No.
know it's not good for you, but maybe you can enjoy it from time to time. But we know that chronic exposure to junk food is a real problem for your metabolic health. And I would be hard pressed to find someone who can eat junk food every day and feel good on a constant basis.
Right. Yeah, maybe, with food and junk food, you can sort of get away with it when you're younger. But then as we
Yeah.
age, we become much more sensitive. And this comes back to, from a health perspective, from our mitochondrial health, right? We know that our mitochondria change. We lose our mitochondria as we're aging. That's why we can get a lot in our CoQ10 levels when we're younger. We can get a lot away with a lot of stuff. But as our energy depletes over time, as we age, then I would imagine that EMF exposure would be compounded in a way that, maybe you can get away with it. And that's why I think our messaging to teenagers and youngsters, like, it drives me nuts. I don't know if you've seen it yourself. I believe you have a child, right?
Yes.
And yeah, when I have lots of children as well. I have 5. So it drives me nuts when I go to a restaurant, or recently my husband and I were away on vacation, and in the restaurant, the parents are enjoying their meal. The kids are nice and calm and sedated because they're watching their tech. As the evening goes on, and and at the airport as well, like, these kids are sedated. Let's say it's not the right term, maybe, but their time is filled. They're quiet. They're complacent. Everything's great in their world, and they've got Bluetooth headphones on. And these kids were like 2 and 3 years old. It was heartbreaking for me. It took everything for me not to just take those things off those kids' heads. Like, this is it's not healthy, and that's why I think the awareness piece for parents and for teenagers, somehow we have to make it cooler for you not to be wearing the AirPods. And is it true that if you wear one of the AirPods, it's better than having both because of the signal going through your brain? Something that I
It
read.
probably
Yeah.
is. I mean,
Yeah.
I wouldn't be, I wouldn't think that one is safe, and I guess two is worse. But at the same time, I would prefer people to just avoid it altogether for
Yeah.
extended periods of time. And
Exactly.
that's really the issue. Again, it's if you want to use, Bluetooth wearables during a workout, maybe that's okay. In the end, you're doing something great for your health, right? And you can work
Yeah.
out and track your heart rate and whatnot. But that's a few hours per week maximum. If you listen to songs, for most people do these days, sometimes it's hours and hours on end, then it makes a good case to actually not do it. And when it comes to children, these risks are have been, calculated in adults, and
Yes.
these risks of brain tumor are in adult, and looking at epidemiology. So uh, I cannot quote the scientist who or remember who said it, but epidemiology is counting the body bags, and that's the sad reality. Is epidemiology is studying the past, who was damaged by the
Yes.
technology, and how many of those talked for how many hours, and we try to figure out the correlation, if not causality, over time. And that's part of the data we have. But in children, what we know is that children, because of the size of their head, will absorb an average of 200% the radiation compared to adults. So
Wow.
we don't know how that leads to additional brain cancer risks, but the sooner you start exposing your brain to this technology, I think the riskier it is over a lifetime. And we know that there is a vast lag, there is a delay between these exposures that could be considered carcinogenic or carcinogenic, and then the onset or the creation of a brain tumor. Sometimes it can be decades. So it is really a tough sell for teenagers and for kids. But
Yeah.
I would try to have kids use Bluetooth sparingly,
Yeah.
if at all. And it is difficult. And if I can mention another way that people are using the phone that I think is the most dangerous, is keeping a phone in the pocket.
Yeah.
Just for adults, it is an
Yeah.
issue, but also for kids. Why is that? Well, we have good data these days. So good, in fact, that neuroscientist Dr. Andrew Huberman emitted concerns last year. And he said, I reviewed the data on the fact that cell phones and pockets might be linked to a reduction in testosterone in men and a reduction of the quality of their sperm and fertility. In
Yes.
children, this might be an even bigger issue, because as you're developing your hormones, and these are related to your growth and to your future longevity and everything about your fertility systems. So he said that the data on cell phones in pocket and the loss of testosterone and fertility is stronger and more convincing than the data we have on BPA.
Wow.
And that's from someone from Stanford. So you have mainstream scientists that actually say, we do have a problem here. The data is strong enough that at least we should tell the population about these risks. And so far, the population is being told there's nothing to see here. And to this
Uh,
day,
yeah.
Health Canada and then the equivalent in the US would be FCC, Federal Communication Commissions. They basically say there are zero risks to these exposures. So
Zero. Wow.
either they're lying, incompetent, doing politics, is probably a bit of everything. But there's been the FCC lost in court 3 years ago when the judges actually looked at the data that was presented by scientists, and the FCC continued to say there's no data, there's no risks associated with this technology. But when the judges reviewed the evidence, they said, my God, you're completely irresponsible, and you're not doing your job at all. So the
Wow.
FCC was forced by the federal court to go back to the drawing board and actually look at these risks. And so far, they've
Mm.
been stalling this case for 3 years. So in the
Really?
meantime, people are still exposed, the
Mm.
public is still in the dark, and people are still, keeping a phone in the pocket. What could be a simpler alternative to a phone in the pocket is that when you put it in your pocket, you hit this airplane mode button. And
Uh-huh.
I know it's a difficult habit to pick up. It demands that you think about it. My
Yes.
wife, when she was pregnant 6 years ago, I had to tell her about these risks because, of course,
Mm.
I'm the EMF guy, and
Yeah, of
you have
course.
to negotiate with your loved ones. Of course, you cannot say, you're going to do this, you're going to do that. They're adults.
Right.
And even with children, it's a tricky business. Even with my 5 year old, I have to be aware that he also wants to hear things in a certain way where I can explain things and not, be like a dictator about it. So
Right,
when I
right.
introduced the idea to my wife, it was very difficult for her to pick up the habit of putting the phone on airplane mode as she was wearing it, or putting it near where our abdomen would be with
Right,
our
right. With the
new
baby. Yeah.
growing child, the baby.
Yeah.
So it was difficult at first, but after a few months, she found herself, putting it on airplane mode and not even thinking about it. So sometimes it's a matter of, just committing to doing it for a few weeks, and
Yes.
then it becomes, part of normal life.
Yeah, that's a great tip. Thank you. Because I see my teenagers sometimes, more than sometimes, putting the phone in the pocket. And I'm like, no. But that's a great tip.
Yeah,
It's a training, it's a brain training thing, right? That, yeah, just
for sure.
simply put it on airplane mode, and that will help to limit the EMFs. Now, I do have a quick question about wearable tech. So the smartwatches, the rings, and people who have the diabetes monitors that are in their skin and connected to their cell phone. What's your thought? And hearing aids as well. What's your thoughts on those, if we can sort of lump those together?
Yeah, this is huge. In the hearing aids, it's very concerning to me because most of the research around hearing aids is focused on how hearing aids can have benefits to people's lives. So there's very little research, if at all, about the potential risks of hearing
Uh-huh.
aids, because
Wow.
you don't need Bluetooth in hearing aids necessarily.
Mm.
These technologies are added on top of the good old hearing aids that were not Bluetooth, just because of convenience, of course. And there are benefits to that convenience in the sense that if people can more easily turn up the volume and use their hearing aids in a way that makes their life more fulfilling, they can hear things. It's a huge deal.
Yeah.
And when it comes to Bluetooth monitor for blood glucose for diabetics, the same idea is there. It brings tremendous benefits and sometimes life-saving benefits to their life. So we should
Right.
not discount that entirely. However, I don't think that these pros are weighted properly with the cons, because the cons are not discussed about. So we could have, for example, glucose monitors that emit a signal once per minute, instead of maybe what they do right now could be multiple times per second. So there are ways to
Wow.
engineer the
Yeah.
technology to be safer, or it could be shielded in a way where it emits minimal radiation towards your body, and all the radiation towards the exterior, which would be just logical. But you don't have these considerations when engineer create biomedical devices, because they listen to the FCC. And remember what the FCC said:
Yeah.
there's no effect whatsoever, which is
Right.
convenient, because if you're a biomedical and medical engineer, there's no concern over Bluetooth exposures. So it doesn't make, you don't have to spend a bunch of time thinking about how can we minimize the radiation from these devices. So this is
Mm.
really, when it comes to the use of Bluetooth for medical uses, normally I tell my readers, you have to find it for yourself what works for you. There are hearing aids that are non-Bluetooth. There
Yes.
are certain companies that still create them, but audiologists normally recommend the Bluetooth kinds because this is the
Yeah.
latest, this is the
Of
best
course. Of
technology,
course.
you know,
Yeah.
the latest model. So it's becoming increasingly difficult to go without them. But I can mention one tracker that I use. I use this ring, the Oura ring,
Yes. Yes.
and why I use it and love it is that it does not emit Bluetooth 24/7. I can keep it on airplane mode. So it means that
Oh,
in the
that's good.
morning
Yeah.
I can put the Bluetooth on and emit radiation, but just to my phone. And after a few seconds, the data is synced. I look at my phone and I say, okay, well, how have I slept? And
Yeah.
what's my heart rhythm? And what's my HRV? And
Yeah.
what's my stress level? Okay. And then I'm done. And I put the ring on airplane mode, and all day and all night it will store the data locally inside the ring. There's a hard drive in this, believe it or not. I mean, I don't know
Wow.
how they do it, but they do.
Yeah.
And it means that all technology should be designed this way, where you
Yeah.
can have a minimal exposure. And at the moment, unfortunately, since we're most of the world is still under the belief that everything is safe, why would they engineer things to minimize radiation? They don't, because it's not a requirement.
Well, yeah, and this is the thing, and I think people have to question themselves and ask, once they're aware and they listen to a podcast such as this, and we are starting to maybe raise some kind of flags for people to say, "Oh, I never thought about, my smartwatch or my hearing aid that could possibly even be a problem. How am I feeling? Have I had headaches since I started, using this thing?" Just I think that awareness piece is really important for people, just to start to question, and then maybe if they can make choices and changes in terms of what tech they choose to use, and if they can put it on airplane mode, then by all means, right? That's definitely just opening minds, I think, is why we're here and why we're talking about this in the first place. And okay, so I do have a question about laptops. Now, it's something that I've posted in my social media. Never put a laptop on your lap, because similar to the phone in the pocket, those EMFs are very damaging, especially to the reproductive organs, for fertility issues, sperm counts, and motility. That's been studied. How do you, and I know you have a hack for this, how do you sort of hack your laptop when you want to minimize your EMF exposure from Wi-Fi with your laptop, especially if you're away
For
from
sure.
home?
Yeah, well, when I'm at home, and that's something I'll mention first, because you can still use to this day a wire, which is, some people think, oh my God, a
Yeah,
wire, that's a wild idea. Instead of Wi-Fi, you use a wire. That's a bit retrograde, or it seems like something we would do, 20 years ago, and it is. But you can use an Ethernet cable and plug it into the laptop, and sometimes you don't have an Ethernet port, so you need an Ethernet to USB-C converter or something very simple. It costs
right.
$20.
Yeah,
These
yeah,
converters, adapters, dongles, call them how you want. You need one.
yeah.
And then you have this wire go into your router. That's the magic of it. That's it. The
Oh,
signal
that's
goes into
it.
your computer. And
Yeah.
then on your computer, you also need to turn off Wi Fi. So that Wi Fi icon needs to be crossed out, and it means there's no radiation. If you are on the go, you cannot, bring a cable, and you would be hard pressed to find an Ethernet port anywhere in the world.
Yes.
I know I've tried and haven't found them. So when I'm traveling the world, and oftentimes I go to coffee shop to work, I will have, and that's, I'll try to make it simple, but the visual isn't there. But you have a long USB cable that goes from your computer, and you can basically, instead of using Wi-Fi on your computer, at the end of this USB extension cord, you would
Yes.
have a small chip that looks almost like a USB key, but that's a USB Wi Fi adapter. So, what
Oh,
you're doing is this: you turn off Wi Fi on your laptop, and you instead use this Wi Fi chip to connect to the internet. But this Wi Fi chip is not right next to your face,
I
it is
see. It's
10
far
feet away.
away. I
Right, it's
see.
far
Yeah.
away. So you're creating the distance. Again, the phone is a problem when it's near your body, and the
Right.
laptop, of course, the laptop is not on your face, but it is quite close to the body. And there are good studies also that found a reduction in fertility from Wi-Fi EMFs emitted by laptops on the lap. Because of course, if you work on your lap, you're exposing yourself to the maximum amount possible on the groin area, your stomach, and the exposures that we know are problematic are to the head. We have evidence about acoustic neuromas that
Mm-hmm.
these are tumors that are non-malignant, but that can lead to complications, including death or deafness. We have parotid gland cancers, thyroid cancers. The evidence is getting better and better. Glioblastomas. So we have cancers in the literature, cancers of the head and neck region. But
Yes.
researchers have asked the questions: could laptop exposure or cell phones in pocket be linked to the vast increases that we see in teenagers and kids in cancers of the groin area? We have
Mm-hmm.
ovarian cancer, uterus cancer, testicular cancer, colon cancer, and we do not know. There's no data that is definitive. So it is a concern, because if it's a carcinogen to your head, why
Yes.
wouldn't it be a carcinogen if you put it not to your head but to your genitalia? Well, the
Right.
reality is
Exactly.
it is likely also something you don't want to do. So the laptop, if you use it on Wi-Fi, at least never use it on your lap.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of silly because that's the name it's used to. I don't know actually why they called it a laptop, because the old laptops used to weigh so much that they
Yeah.
weren't really comfortable to use on the lap. But
Right. Yes.
nowadays, with the nice MacBook computers that weigh 2 pounds, they're
Yeah.
so thin, they're so cool. You
Exactly.
use them on the sofa, at least create separation
Yes.
between the laptop and your body, such as using a pillow. But even
Yep.
then, I prefer using them on a table, and that
Mm-hmm.
way you're not exposed very close to the body,
And sort of sit back from it and stretch your arms out as much as
if possible.
possible,
Yeah,
if
yeah.
you need to, because I mean, now I'm thinking of my kids too, the kids that are still in school, they need to be, it's a requirement for school to be on a laptop, and a lot of their courses, I mean, it's not paper anymore like back in the day when I was a kid.
Yeah.
Everything is electronic. So yeah, whatever little changes we can make and our kids can make during the day, those are, it's the little things that you do day to day that make the big difference later on, and again, as we're aging, right? So okay, smart meters, another question that I have. So of course, here we're both in Canada, but in other parts of the world, they years ago started implementing and putting in the smart meters for our homes. And of course, if everybody doesn't know what a smart meter is, it's what is at least in our region, it's monitoring your use of your electricity and such. And of course, they dock you for it if you're using and doing a load of laundry at the wrong time of day or running your dishwasher at the wrong time of day. You're going to get docked for it, so they can monitor in terms of your usage. Now, these give off EMFs. Correct. And can you tell us a little bit about, the risks of that, and I don't know, the levels, like a smart meter versus a laptop, like how do we quantify this?
Yes, well, the laptop you can turn off and you can listen to my advice and have an Ethernet cable, but a smart meter you cannot turn off. And that's why it's slightly different. Some people have found that when a smart meter is installed on their home, they start feeling more sensitive to EMFs. And that's something that is hard to define. Some researchers would call it electrosensitivity. So
Okay.
that's one concern. The smart meters, some of them emit several times per second. And some engineers that are EMF aware have asked the question, why do these machines send a signal about my electricity usage 6 times per second? And the answer is, we don't know. We've designed them this way because other models can emit, for example, once per 30 minutes. So
Yeah.
it's just completely nonsensical the way they're architectured and created in the first place. Then you have the problem that in certain situations, people find that it impacts their sleep when they are too close to a smart meter. And not only one smart meter, but sometimes you can have a vast array of different smart meters, sometimes up to 50 for the entire building, and
Oh
that
my
could be on the
goodness.
other side of the wall. So if
Yeah.
you are on an apartment building, a condo building, just think about it and look at the other side of the wall. If there's an
Mm-hmm.
entire wall of smart meters, if you sleep well, maybe don't panic over it. But if you've been sleeping very poorly, it could have a strong correlation, in which case, I would recommend, if it's an entire wall of smart meters, it's hard to mitigate against. I would look into hiring what's called a building biologist. And these are professionals that can survey the environment and actually look at how much are these machines emitting. And
Mm.
this is, in those cases, it's almost a sort of environmental pollution that is invasive inside your home, which is
Hmm.
very, very frustrating for a lot of people, because no matter how much you mitigate against Wi-Fi, or even you change your habits around cell phones after having listened to this very interview, well, the smart meters can still be problematic. If you have one smart meter on your home, you can either replace it with a non-smart meter that is analog, with these little quadrants that actually spin like
Yeah,
this. So
yeah.
these are the old school models. In certain states or countries, you can do that and do what's called an opt out from the smart meter program.
Hmm.
But in certain legislations, they won't let you do it. It's
Mm.
simply by law, they can actually impose the smart meter on you. In which case, the next best thing is what's called a smart meter guard or cover that you can
Hmm.
put over the smart meter, and it will dampen the radiation. Not perfect, as many things go with EMF mitigation. It's not the perfect solution, but at least it's slightly improving the environment.
Yes. And do they emit the EMFs like 360 degrees all the way around the actual device? Because I know that
It's
the
mostly in front, but a little bit
it's
in the
mostly in
back, and
front.
it will
Yeah.
depend. It will depend on the composition of the wall and all sorts of factors. So sometimes your own
Yeah.
smart meter can be problematic, and sometimes it's a neighbor that emits a smart meter towards
Oh,
you. So
towards you. I
it
never
is
thought of
it is a
that. Yeah.
complicated thing. Yeah,
So you may
it is
need
a
to buy a
complicated thing.
may
Yeah,
need to buy one for your neighbor as well. Just put it on their
yeah.
smart meter. Oh, yeah, hopefully you have good
Maybe in that
neighbors, right?
case you want to, yeah,
Yeah.
you want to at least give them some context. Or maybe if you know that they're skeptical, don't tell them about it and just install the cover and say, oh, I'm just, it's for your own good. I don't know. It's
Yeah.
a tough
Yeah.
sell. It's difficult to, um like, in this day and age, you cannot go to a neighbor and tell them you need to turn off your Wi-Fi at night.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wouldn't it be good if I could do that in my building? But at the moment, you might look like an alien if you do that. And
Well, yeah.
so you have to go through education and letting people make their own decisions also, which is, it's tough. But the reality is that you should really focus on what you have control over. And then if you find that your neighbor's on board, well, you can, have the entire building turn off the Wi-Fi at night. And what might just
Mm.
happen is that it might become a habit, and people should sleep better in this environment.
Right. Not to mention headaches and getting flu-like symptoms. I'll share just really quickly. I had an experience. I was staying in a hotel, and I got very, very sick. Flu-like. It was really bad. It was like the worst flu I had ever had in my life. And looking back at that, went back to that area probably 6 to 8 months later and looked above the hotel. I know exactly which room we were in the hotel, looked above, and sure enough, there were some 5G installations right above the room that we were staying in. And I thought, that's what it was. Because I rarely get sick, knock on wood again. It's something that I take a lot of pride in my health, and I do what I think is right to take care of myself and my family in terms of health. That's just who I am, right? And it was such a weird thing that I got so sick, and sure enough, I 100% believe that it was because those towers were right above that room. And yeah, for people who don't know, and then, it makes you more aware when you're out and about and driving in different areas and you see a lot of these towers, the cell phone towers that are now on top of buildings, right? That people are living in these buildings. I hope they were consulted. Like, are you okay with the fact that we're going to install these? And back to your
Yeah, they
point
they are
where,
not consulted.
no, of course, and back to your point
Yeah.
where, according to the powers that be, that there's no problem here, right? So this is where I think when we educate one another, it definitely, hopefully, will have some traction for decision makers that are able to potentially, at least have some more awareness around this, or the technology in some way changes. That it, yes, you can still have, right? You can still have the technology. You can still have the ability to use this tech, and it helps to move our, the speed of what we do forward in a great way, but at the same time, not so detrimental for our health in the long run, which is so important. Okay, so here's another question. So for people who live in densely populated areas, big cities, we know that, and certainly if there is a lot of, cell phone towers and things, they're visible, that they're there. More people, of course, using their cell phones. Is there a way to, besides moving and just getting out of there and moving, up into the mountains somewhere, is there a way or other ways that we can protect ourselves from maybe not even our own EMFs from our own cell phones, but from, the ambient EMFs that are around us? Like, what can we do to help to mitigate some of those risks on our physiology?
Yeah, it is tricky. This part of the conversation is not my favorite because talking about cell phone towers is quite scary. And then the solutions are some people need to move away, or
Yeah.
some people need to fight and do an entire legal battle against who installs these cell phone towers. And the rights of citizens around getting these removed is quite slim. It's
Mm.
very, very difficult to fight those, although there are some groups of attorneys that are now seeing wins over the placement of cell phone towers. So that's a good thing. uh, I want to mention case reports that have been published by Leonard Hardell and Mona Nilsson in Sweden. Leonard Hardell is the first scientist that is recognized to have sounded the alarm towards the fact that the Agent Orange that was sprayed over Vietnam during the war was a
Mm.
carcinogen,
Mm.
highly credentialed. And he's now an expert on EMF. He's been
Oh,
doing
wow, really?
epidemiology around EMFs for 20 years. And he's published 8 different case studies in the last 3 years on people who uh, are in a certain place. 5G gets installed very close to their either apartment building or office space, and
Mm.
then they don't feel well. For example, this case report in 2023 were essentially the levels of EMFs measured were 250 times greater when they installed the 5G tower compared to the previous towers that were there, 3G and 4G. So,
Wow.
what I want to tell people is this: if you are concerned that a tower is pointing straight at your bedroom,
Mm.
or you can almost touch it with a stick, because in certain situations, citizens are living in high rises and they're right next to a tower, and you don't feel well where you live, hire a building biology consultant and make sure to take the readings. Maybe you'll find that everything is well, or maybe you'll find that the levels are so high that this is unsustainable.
Mm.
And when the government, the Indian government, looked at the data more than 10 years ago in the Rajasthan province, which is the most densely populated area or the largest province in India, they
Mm.
had to dismantle hundreds and thousands of different cell towers because they were too close to people's homes, too close
Really?
to hospitals, too close to schools, too close to playgrounds, and too close to nursing homes, things like that, where sensitive populations are. So in certain countries, in fact, they're starting to move away these towers, but we don't hear about the fact that
Mm.
these legislations are put in place. In North America, it is the opposite of what
Mm.
is happening in France, in Israel, in India. You also have cases in, all around the Western nations and beyond. You
Mm.
have cases where cell phone towers were deemed dangerous, but in North America, our rules are among the most permissive of the entire planet, along
Wow.
with Australia and a few nations in the Western world. So it means that if you think you are overexposed to cell phone
Mm.
towers,
Mhm.
you need to take readings. And then there are groups, there's this group, Physicians for Safe Technology. If you want to find doctors that actually talk about these dangers, not just the
Mhm.
EMF guy, and
Yeah, yeah.
or some person, some blogger on the internet, actually Physicians for Safe Technology. If you type that in any search engine, you're going to find them. These are physicians that can actually see you or you can talk about these dangers and not feel like a crazy person. And
Wow.
there's an increasing amount of physicians that are now trained around these dangers. And
Mm,
what I've been told in my latest summit is that more and more people come in with these sensitivities where they say, I used to be fine. Maybe I lived in this apartment building in Manhattan. I felt fine,
yeah.
but now I don't. All of a sudden, is it because I'm getting old? And sometimes it is, but also combined with an increased amount of reactivity to
Mm,
this agent that is
hmm.
invisible. So think about it this way. Maybe at first you can tolerate dairy and gluten when you're 20-year-old, and maybe at 35 you realize, oh my God, my digestion is all messed up. What's
Yeah, yeah.
happening? And it's not necessarily that gluten and dairy are more dangerous than before, but maybe your tolerance has changed. And
Hmm.
more and more people become in this almost it's not like being intolerant to gluten. They become like a celiac that reacts so much to a little bit of exposure, and you don't want to reach this level of sensitivity because it makes it next to impossible to live in today's modern world. It makes it that you don't feel well in a city, for example. So there are
Right.
ways to recover from these exposures, and this is the sort of stuff that we've been talking about with medical doctors and different attorneys and EMF mitigation specialists in the summit also.
Oh, that's so fantastic to know that there's a resource now and there's people that actually won't look at you like you have two
Yeah.
heads when you start saying that, yeah, I'm not feeling well because of this type of exposure. So that's great. That's really promising. That's better than, what I've heard in the last 10 years, in terms of people waking up to this type of correlation. So that's fantastic. So do you recommend, and have you yourself, have you had someone come into your home and to look for dirty electricity and to sort of do an assessment? Is that something that you recommend that people do in their homes?
For sure. I think, and dirty electricity as a whole, another animal, it's not only the radio frequency radiation that is a man made EMF, but dirty electricity is, let's say, the amount of different frequencies that can be present on the electricity in your home. Almost think of it as, you can have clean tap water in certain municipalities, or you can
Yes.
have dirty tap water. So you can have clean electricity and you can
Mm.
have dirty electricity that
Mm-hmm.
just is that much more stressful to your biology. So building biologists or different types of EMF mitigation specialists can look at different types of fields, and their goal is not, complete elimination. It's like saying, please try to eliminate all toxins from your life. Good luck
Yeah.
with that.
Yeah. Not possible.
Eskimos are finding in snow samples glyphosate in snow
Yeah.
samples, and even on the ice cap. So we cannot escape all toxins. What we
Right.
can do is try to do better. And when you quantify your environment with these professionals, at least you can know for sure, is it the towers I should be worried about, or is
Mm.
it just the different machines that I've been installing all over my home that contribute to this electro pollution?
Right, right. Because there could be, whether it's the light bulbs, it's the smart, homes with the that you can connect the Wi-Fi. Yeah, all of that. Not so great if you're sensitive, but even if, like you're saying, if you're not sensitive yet, it's something that your exposure over time, it could be, one day you just hit that tipping point and you have a serious problem. So decreasing, and is it expensive to have these people come in? And like, I have no idea. I've not yet done it, so that's why I'm asking.
Yeah, it can be an investment. I'll be honest about it. Some of them are several $100s, a little bit over $1,000. It depends on how many different things you have to measure. What is the size of your home, of course.
Yes.
So it can be quite an investment, and then the mitigation strategies are also an investment. But I think that increasingly people recognize the value of investing in not only their diet and supplements, but also how clean is the environment. If you
Mm-hmm.
make the building biologists are not just about EMFs, and I should have mentioned that, but sometimes most of them are also trained on air quality, the quality of your water, the
Okay.
presence or absence of mold. So all of these things will contribute also to sensitivities, because people who are sometimes EMF sensitive are also feeling the effects of mold. They don't feel
Yes.
good in
Yeah.
a moldy home, and sometimes, again, they are hypersensitive to mold, which means a little bit of mold is problematic for them, and might not be problematic even for their husband or wife. So it makes it even sometimes very difficult when one person in the household does not feel good and
Yes.
everyone else is fine, right?
Uh-huh.
Talk about a
Yes.
situation where it's very easy to discount them or
Right. Yes.
disregard how they're feeling. Come on, we're fine. The cell towers are exposing me and I feel perfectly fine. And that's
Uh-huh.
good for you. But it does not mean that it doesn't do anything, because on a cellular level, the stress is still there. And over time, maybe your tolerance will go down. And I don't wish down
Mm-hmm.
on anyone, but the reality is more and more people are feeling it these days.
Right, right. Okay, well that's great advice and definitely something to look into for people that, especially if you're not doing well, if you are suffering with some kind of condition, or you know that you've got a candida or mold issue and you have that super sensitivity, that definitely to investigate not only the mold, but like you said, the EMFs in your environment as well. That's a great takeaway, I think, for a lot of my followers, that we do talk about these issues and gut health and microbiome and mold and candida and parasites. And if, yeah, some people are just more sensitive, but you have to wonder and ask yourself why, right? So EMFs could tie into all of that.
For sure.
Question about electric cars. What's your take on electric cars? Is there any data out on electric cars now and affecting health?
There's a lot of speculation where some people think, well, electric cars, but it says this in the name, right? We're getting zapped and these are higher exposures. One of my colleagues took readings. The electric cars are hybrid. They're not necessarily worse than the new cars that are gas powered,
Mm,
because the new cars that are gas powered have sensors in them. They have Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, and sometimes you have 4G LTE hotspots right there in the dashboard. So in
mm-hmm.
reality, all cars are becoming increasingly so great sources of exposures. So in cars, what you could do is turn off Wi-Fi, turn off Bluetooth if that option is available in the dashboard, and
Mm-hmm.
especially so if you spend a lot of time in your car, right? If you barely commute, that car is always parked or in your garage. Don't worry about that source that much. Focus on your computer and where you spend time in your bedroom.
Right.
But if you're like my dad, who's a realtor, for example, and you spend 3, 4 hours, 5 hours in your car per day, then
Yes,
it
yes,
becomes a priority for you, right?
of
So
course. Yeah.
I don't think we should be completely paranoid of electric cars yet. But
Mm.
what we should think about is never really spend time in that car while it's charging. And I've
Oh,
seen the
yeah.
levels while it's charging. It's not recommended. I don't know why you would want to do that anyway, but don't do it.
Okay, that's a great takeaway. Yeah. I know that I'm super sensitive to electric cars. I don't like them. I don't feel well when I'm in them, and that's just
Yeah.
me, but that's another story. I'm super sensitive. So anything else that you wanted to mention, Nick, before we part ways? It was so wonderful to have you here and to share all of your expertise. Is there any takeaway that, you feel that you need to say before we say goodbye? Yeah.
Well, I'll just start
Okay.
with a few tips, because I think it can. I'll recognize that this can be overwhelming if you think about EMFs. Especially if you buy a meter. I'm all about buying a meter and being curious, but sometimes it's a source of anxiety for people. Let's face it.
Right.
They measure the computer, it's bad. They measure their TV screen, it's bad. Everything's bad, right?
Yeah.
So don't measure your toaster or Vitamix. Measure things that matter. So your pillow, right? What is near your pillow? Because the bedroom
Uh-huh.
environment should be as clean as possible. That's first. The
Okay.
second place I want you to focus on is where else do you spend time? Is it your office environment, or is it your
Mm.
car, or is it your favorite sofa, or is it your kitchen table where you work, right? So
Mhm.
you know
Mhm.
where you're spending time during the week. And this is really where you're spending time is where you should mitigate. And I talk about the toaster example. Someone writes to me the other day and says, Nick, my toaster is Bluetooth. Is it a worry for my health? And I say, how much time do you spend, your face looking at your toasts in the morning? 2 minutes?
Right.
So don't worry about 2 minutes. Worry
Right.
about 200 hours per month kind of thing, right? So
Right. Yeah.
think in these terms, and then forget the little occasional exposures, because you're going to be overwhelmed. So instead, focus on your bedroom and focus on where you spend time. And if you want me to get into the summit, The summit is very simple. It's 20 interviews for 4 days. It's April 11th to 14th. There's Robert F. Kennedy Jr., there's Dr. Neil Nathan, who talks about how he helps patients that are hypersensitive recover and go back to health. There's a lot of hope that I want to talk about with this summit. So not only is it a source of information to discover how you might be sensitive yourself, how to mitigate against these different risks, but
Mm-hmm.
also think about it as an invitation to recover and feel better, because a lot of people realize I'm sensitive. And the message I heard from my guests this year, because this is the third time we do this annual summit, is that you can recover. And it's not true that you're bound to get worse. And many people think that year
Mm-hmm.
after year, they're going to feel more and more sensitive, and I feel sick and I don't feel well. You can recuperate, but many people don't have the right information. So I think with the summit is the occasion for them to listen to the right scientists, to the right medical doctors, even the right attorneys that are joining us for the summit, including the Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who's an environmental attorney, and learn from them directly. So I'm very excited to present this information. It's free of charge to watch for 4 days, April 11th to 14th.
That is amazing. And I definitely will be tuning into that. So much, promising. And that's what I love, the fact that you bring it back to, having a positive outlook on things. So much of what we do in educating people, I think, about health can be very super scary,
Yeah.
and some people don't want to hear it. But yeah, the education piece is part of it. But then to know that there are things that we can do to protect ourselves and to feel better is so empowering. So that is fantastic. So I know that there is a link, emfhazards.com, correct, that everybody can get on board with the summit for this year, that I encourage everybody to take a look at. And how can people reach you, Nick, if they want to, get in contact with you, your website, your book? Let us know.
Sure. Everything is found as at the EMF Guy. So THEEMFguy.com. And that's my
Okay.
book, courses, my podcast, everything is in between. And again, you mentioned it nicely. EMF Hazards with an S.com is the summit. And we're always, putting out a new summit every year. I think it's going to be an annual event because we can always reach out to so many people and at least make them aware of these issues.
That's so amazing. Well, I thank you, Nick, for taking the time to sit and chat with me today. It was very enlightening, such great information, research backed as well. We will be adding some of the links to some of the research and the studies, the reviews that you mentioned. Hopefully, that will help to, really solidify for some people who do have that sort of nerdy, sciencey aspect of their personality, like I do, to really see that this is something that we can take a deeper look at. And I thank you again for joining me. Good luck with the summit, and I'm sure we will speak again soon.
Thank you so much.